I'm Liam.
I'm Wayne,
You're listening to In Film We Trust YouTube.
a place where we post clips from our recent episode.
All links down below in the description.
And now, on with the show.
Grindhouse, Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez's 2007 double feature, including Death Proof and Planet Terror.
I imagine Tarantino and Rodriguez would like to have done a collaboration for quite a long time because they've been friends for ages, haven't they?
Do you know where they met? The Toronto Film Festival in 1992, when Tarantino was making Reservoir Dogs and Robert Rodriguez was making El Mariachi. Or they had already made it, but they were selling it at this point.
Oh, but they're promoting it here.
Promoting it, yes.
Yeah, you can see their kind of sensibilities working together very well, can't you?
Well, Grindhouse is the perfect encapsulation of both of their styles. They're both coming from a very exploitation, genre, action, a base, aren't
And so
they?
that's why you could say this Grindhouse thing was kind of like a perfect idea for them to pool their talents, you could
And
say.
interestingly, this film actually sprung from Tarantino. He would have this penchant for screening double features to friends, especially Robert Rodriguez. He said, I always wanted to do a double feature. Hey, why don't you direct one and I'll do the other? And Tarantino quickly replied, and we've got to call it Grindhouse.
Grindhouse. Well, it makes sense because they're paying homage essentially to the... Would you call Grindhouse a genre?
No, Grindhouse isn't a genre. What Grindhouse is there were these terms for rundown theatres in urban areas. And usually because they were rundown, they weren't usually getting like A-list films. So what would happen is you'd get the B movies, the exploitation movies coming through. And that's how it got it. A lot of these cinemas, they were old vaudeville buildings.
Yeah. Would you say then that Grindhouse is kind of like the counterpart to art house films? Because these movies are, like you say, it's your kind of splatter films, your slasher films, your cheap B movies. That's what these look like. Again, completely different to what you'd regard as art house cinema.
Yeah, there's almost like a tangible correlation between these and the, in the 90s you had the Van Damme films, then direct to video, well, went after a certain point direct to video, but whereas them were way more polished, even direct to video, these exploitation films were far grittier, than a Van Damme film.
Yeah, even like the aesthetic, which is something we'll talk about later.
Yes.
Even it had this very kind of broken down, gritty aesthetic. But that was part of the charm because you watched it and you thought, these are what these movies used to be like.
And well, the aesthetic, as you mentioned, which we'll get to, that's not actually how they were filmed. How that aesthetic came to be is because these were cheap films at the time. They would only make about several prints of the film, and they wouldn't be released on a mass release like films are now. So they would tour the country. So they would go to cinema, to cinema, to cinema, to cinema. And because there were so few prints of these films, as it would travel, the actual quality of the film would start to degrade, which is where we get like our characteristic, the scratches, the missing reels. That's actually how it came to be, just through being torn to shreds on the trail.
So basically, if you watched the first showing of the film and then the last showing of it, you would notice a kind of appreciable decline in quality.
Definitely. You'd almost even get a Frankenstein quality where it's like, oh shit, this print's got a missing reel.
Yeah.
So they'll patch it together. So, for example, one scene could be very bad quality and the next would be almost in Technicolor.
Yeah, and you're saying about Grindhouse having an interesting history. So did double features, because it was a thing that came about in the 30s, and it was about America trying to bounce back from the Great Depression, so they would sell you one ticket, get access to two movies. It was like a kind of 2-for-1 deal like you get in supermarkets.
Yep.
And it was to essentially incentivize people coming back to cinemas after the Depression.
So was this ever a British thing?
Well, I know it's...
Or a European even. It seems extremely American, doesn't it?
It does seem more American. What we did have here, something I remember quite fondly, were double feature VHS tapes. Because I remember growing up, we had one. It was Hard Rain with Christian Slater and Daylight featuring Sylvester Stallone. Films that seem to have nothing to do with each other, just slammed together on a VHS tape.
Well, they even you get them to this day, even with DVDs, Blu-rays, a lot of it is cheaper companies. It's almost like an action pack.
Yeah, and I know Tarantino, it was like a double bill, two films, Drag Strip Girl and Rock All Night.
Rock and Roll All Night.
Yeah, Rock and Roll All Night. Both of them owned the posters, and it was from then they wanted to make a double feature, because Tarantino, he loves his exploitation movies.
Yes.
He watched exploitation, horror films, kung fu films. He has his own film festival where he would screen films like this. It's obvious they both have this love and appreciation for this genre, so you could see why they'd want to make this double feature.
Well, Tarantino owns the New Beverly in Hollywood, doesn't he?
The New Beverly does,
and he shows a lot of these films, because you can see it in actually every Tarantino film, his love of the genre.
Yeah, he's always paying homage to these other films.
Yes.
Like, some folk have said it's a rip-off, the way it's done, but it feels much more like he's just paying tribute to these films he loved.
Well, there's loads of references.
There's a
whether
lot of
it's Lady Snowblood and Kill Bill.
Yeah. But it's everything from like kind of subtle camera movements to entire lines of dialogue.
And we can't underestimate the influence, like you said, Rock and Roll All Night, Drag Strip Girl, both produced or made by Roger Corman.
Roger Corman, one of the gods of B-movie cinema.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't underestimate his influence on this Grindhouse double feature.
It hasn't. And what Tarantino wanted to do is, they said, when they had these posters for Grindhouse films looked fantastic. They were unbelievable.
Yes.
But because of the low budget, they couldn't often deliver. So Tarantino says, we're going to make 2 sleazy Grindhouse movies that deliver on their posters. But of course, they had the budget and the means to do that.